So what are you looking forward to this Christmas? Have you thought about that question much? I know it's really, some of you just kind of hit that we're actually in December, but have you thought about what you're looking forward to the most? Seems like every year I have something that I really look forward to, whether it's a favorite dish or family time together, or just maybe to breathe a little bit, or a special song. A lot of those things bring memories. Smell. I asked the student life high school group on Wednesday what they're looking forward to, and I heard all kinds of different things, from family, getting a certain gift, getting some time off of school, bread. Bread was an answer. I'm still rolling that one around, but I like bread too. But I think there are many things, right, that we think of at holidays, whether it is a special food. Maybe it is a bread or a pie, or maybe a candy that someone made for you. Lots of different memories come to the top at Christmas time. And sometimes in the midst of kind of enumerating those joys and those things that we think about, I think for me, what I finally landed on is just kind of the joy of the season in general. I like seeing people excited. I like seeing when maybe a child opens a gift and they're really excited about it, or you saw just the pure energy that is so hard to keep up with in this room a minute ago, where it's just like kids are just crossing and just running, and I'm just like, why are you running? What are you doing? And they're just like so excited to just be here. It's just awesome to see, and I'm like, I'm ready to sit down. But they're so excited and energetic. There's more than one reason, is the point to all this. There's more than one reason to get ready for the season. And there's more than one reason for the season. And so we're going to talk about, over the next 3 weeks, 3 reasons for this season. Reasons why this season exists. And I think it's important to think about that as we prepare to celebrate Christmas. Why is Christmas here? Why is Christmas still here over 2,000 years later? Why is Christmas so widely celebrated by those that are, dedicated Jesus folks, those that are not, the culture at large? Like, what is the point of all that? So we're going to talk about what that looks like over the next 3 weeks. Perhaps you've seen a sign like this in a hobby store or a craft store, or you've seen somebody wearing a t-shirt. I saw a bumper sticker with something similar to this the other day. And so a lot of people, really focus in on this statement: Jesus is the reason for the season. And ultimately, of course, it's true. And it is his name is in the holiday, right? It's hard to get away from. And so it is true, and it's ultimately our job as the church to communicate that to the world. It's not Target's job to do that. It's not Old Navy's job to do that. It's our job to teach what this is about. And it's one of the most unique things the church does. Lots of groups do similar things to what the church does when we do good in our culture. But we uniquely have the job of the communication of the good news of Jesus. No other group is tasked with that job. That is our core competency alone. And so today what I want to start to do is to dig into the backstory of Christmas. So many times we just start with the birth account, or we start with a really shortened version, but I want to dig into why Jesus was necessary. What was the world like at that point? What was happening? And then why did Jesus come into existence in our world? Why did God send Jesus? And I think maybe that's one of the most important questions we can ask at Christmas. Why did God send Jesus? What was the whole point of that first Christmas? Christmas actually goes back 114 years or so around a little over 4,000 years. And it goes back to the very beginning of our Bible in Genesis chapter 12. And we kind of touched on it last week, but we're going to really dive into it today. This idea that God made a promise. And God made a promise to one fella. His name at the time was Abram. It later changes to Abraham. Some kids know the song Father Abraham, or maybe you heard that growing up. But that's who we're talking about. So when you hear me say Abram, I'm just talking about his first name. That was his first name, and it changed to Abraham. But Abram and God have this relationship, and God makes a promise to Abram that Abram does not really grasp the depth of at that point, and neither did anyone else. So let's take a look at that. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Now, we have to pause here for a moment and understand the context of what's being said and what's going on right then. Abram is 75 years old at this time. He does not have a child. Neither him and his wife have a child together. And he's very curious about this promise, as any of us would be. He's thinking, I'm not great, so how am I going to be a great nation? I don't even have an heir. I don't have someone to carry my name forward. So how could that happen? And I don't think when I just read the text over the last few years that I ever really got a sense of just how old Abram was and how crazy this promise sounds on the surface. Until I went to Sight and Sound Theater in Branson. I know some of you have been there. It's an awesome venue. I love it. It's a venue that brings the Bible to life. And honestly, sometimes when you're just reading black and white text, it loses something. It's hard because your imagination has to conjure up images of a time that we are so removed from. I mean, it's kind of like reading a Western novel. If you've ever read Western novels before, your mind takes you there, but you really don't know what it would be like not to have running water or electricity or to be in a duel. You really can't get there mentally, but you imagine. And so when we read the Bible text, we're trying to put ourselves in the time, but it's very difficult to do. But at Sight and Sound, they have livestock and animals and camels and everything, and it's like a 180-degree theater, and they bring the stories to life. It's really cool. Well, I was there, and they brought Abram out once for one of the stories. And he comes out, and he's like hobbled. He's like barely making it. And I'm thinking, and you know me, I can hardly enjoy any kind of thing like that because I'm like, I'm going to look that up, make sure that's accurate. No, I don't remember it that way. That's me. So it's just terrible. I go to church if I'm not preaching, and I'm always like, I don't know, I'm going to write that down and look that up later. But so there, I'm just trying to pick it apart, and my family's always like, can you just enjoy it for a minute, please? I'm like, well, I didn't have them that way. But so I was really kind of, like, oh, and it struck me that I had never really grappled with the fact that Abram is so old. And it's ridiculous to say a great nation is going to come through you to a 75-year-old guy who's childless. It's absurd. And yet that's the promise God makes. Now the weird thing is as you read the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, as you read through those stories, it doesn't happen instantly. And so I'm certain that all of his descendants also really question this. I mean, there's a certain sense where they're like, okay, probably this is going to happen. But for thousands of years, it doesn't. And this is what I had never gotten before. That we're almost in the same spot. We're almost in the same exact position as we wait for the second coming of Christ. Think about this being over 2,000 years since Jesus' death and resurrection. And we're told this is coming, and we're told we have inheritance in this, and we're told this great thing is coming, the kingdom of God will, and yet we're waiting. Well, that's how Abraham's ancestors were for all that time. They'd been told, they'd been made a promise from God, but boy, howdy, they'd gone through some rough stuff, being taken into captivity and being thrown around in wars and wars and wars. And bad people rising up, and oh my goodness. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of similarity we have with the Israelites. There's a lot of similarity we have with the Hebrews. Like, there's so many things going on there. Abraham is old, and I'd never really grasped just how similar I kind of think we feel sometimes in that situation of the waiting. And so Abram must have wondered, what kind of promise is this? What kind of promise is this that I'm going to be great when I'm not great, and I don't have a lineage here to prove and stand on, and I don't have wealth, and I don't have people that are following me? But this is where Christmas begins. In the very next verse, it says, God says to him, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, this is where it gets radical. Not only is Abram and his lineage going to be blessed, that's saying something, right? That's saying something. You and all your ancestors for eternity are going to be blessed. That's big. This is beyond the pale. Not only are you going to be blessed and all your descendants, but here's the deal. all people on earth will be blessed through you. Nothing had been said like this to this point because it's radical. How on earth would Abram be the starting point to bless not only his lineage, but every person on earth? And what we'll see is that God is actually faithful to this promise. God promised people, every person, every single person would be blessed because of what comes through Abram's life. That good will come to them. That's what blessing ultimately is. I know sometimes we struggle with what does it mean to bless, and I think it's interesting. I had to dive into this again. God blesses Abram, and God is blessing people, but also we bless God. What does that mean when we bless God? And what does that look like? We have to dive into what the word bless means. It is to do good for someone. It is to put good into their life, or to intentionally live good towards them. So what happens here is because of Abram and his descendants, good comes not just for him and them, but for us as well, for all people. Abram has a son named Isaac, and through that son, Isaac has 12 sons. And 10 of these sons, which is the story I was watching at that theater, 10 of these sons sell one of their brothers into slavery. They don't like him very much. And so at that point in history, it's looking like this isn't going so well. Blessing isn't coming through these people. These people are crazy. They're going to sell their own brother into slavery. So it's looking terrible at that point. But then a few more generations pass, and a guy comes onto the scene named Moses. This is in the lineage. It starts all the way back with Abram. And all of a sudden, things start to kind of materialize through Moses' special relationship with God. Now, if you've ever watched the Ten Commandments movie, you know that Egypt didn't feel particularly blessed by the presence of Moses. You know how rough it was for Egypt. They went through a lot of trials and tribulations. It was their own fault, absolutely. But they didn't feel blessing, and so that's not the whole world being blessed. But what they did feel was the presence of what was happening and changing in the midst of our world. But here's the thing. It still wasn't there yet. The scriptures hadn't been fulfilled. Thousands more years pass, thousands of years, wars and violence. People are born and die, human junk, bad rulers, evil things happen. And then God speaks through another prophet. He speaks to this guy named Isaiah. Isaiah 49:6, he says, "It is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light to the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." Certainly, there was pushback on the prophet when he said this, because what he's saying is people had kind of got in their mind that Israel was the only blessed nation at that point. The Israelites believed that. And for this prophecy to come true, the Gentiles, who are everyone that's not of the nation of Israel, that means everyone else would be blessed. Well, it merely is rephrasing what he said to Abram, that everyone on earth would be blessed. But here it is once again. It's too small, he says. It's too small for just Israel to be blessed. It's going to go to everyone. You will be a light. And indeed, that is what happens. If we continue to fast forward in history, we get to about 63 BC, and the Roman general Pompey conquers Jerusalem. And once again, the whole world has to be like, this makes no sense, how everyone could be blessed through Abram, because they don't even have their own homeland anymore. They've been conquered once again. Pompey runs through Jerusalem. Pompey runs through Judea. He just takes all of it. And he annexes them into Rome. Welcome to your new Roman overlords. We are now in charge. And so at that point in history, the hope, the Advent hope, and morale had to have been just almost zero, because they had to be aching. Like if you have missed someone for a while, you know what that aching feels like. Whether you've missed them because they've moved far off, or because you've lost them and they're not here with us anymore, and you feel that aching. And sometimes Christmas brings those emotions up where we ache. And they were aching for this Messiah, because the kingdom of Israel seemed like a failed kingdom. It was done. They were into captivity of the Romans. They were under occupation. No light, no blessing through Abram, hopeless. But here's the thing. God had made a promise. Check this out. Galatians 4:4, Paul says, this is what really happened. When the set time had fully come, God sent his son. Now, looking backwards, we can go, oh yeah, there's things that had to happen in history to be ready for this. They weren't ready for the Messiah at the beginning. Moses, they weren't ready for the Messiah. These people are making golden cows and they're worshiping golden. They weren't ready. They weren't ready through all this process. Think about some of the things that happened in those 2,000 years in our world. Think about how technology changed. Think about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was crushing it, literally. They were going around and just crushing civilizations, and yet they were bringing in some advances that would make the gospel be able to go from tiny little Jerusalem, Judea, to the ends of the earth. Some of those things included seaports and highways for trade routes. But what does a trade route also establish? A communications route. There wasn't the internet. There weren't newspapers. There weren't broadcast towers. But there were now venues that made it a lot safer to travel. And so the gospel had a lot better shot at going to the ends of the earth than it did before. Expanded cultures. Cultures started melding with one another as they traded spices and clothes and wealth. And so when Paul says the time had fully come, God knew the timing. We didn't know the timing. The Israelites didn't know the timing. But God knew the time when Jesus would come into history. And God sent this blessing. Have you ever had really bad timing and just been like, man, it would have been better if I would have said it this way or done it this way or come in at this point, and you're just like, oh, my timing is so bad. Well, I want to share something that's kind of a secret in my life today. And many of you know I'm a big nerd. I mean, obviously. But you know I'm a big video game nerd. I love video games. Ever have since I was a child. And the NES was the first video game system I had. It wasn't the first one I played, but it was the first one I owned. And you know that I like video games, but what you don't know, and this is really hard for me, is that I'm really terrible at video games. I'm really bad. I owned one game for the NES for the first 2 years I owned that system. Renting games is a big deal. I never got past level 3 on Mario. The only way I ever saw Bowser was with cheat codes. I'm just laying it all out. I'm confessing. There were books. They made books at your school book fair of cheats, and I still couldn't beat it until I put the codes in to actually just skip levels. I was terrible. And you know what it was that was the worst with me? It was my hand-eye coordination. My timing was off. I would jump, and for some reason, when you touch a mushroom in this game, you die. I still don't understand the mechanics of this game, but for some reason, when you run into a mushroom, you instantly do this. I don't know if that's what he's really doing, but it looks like that to me. Like, what are you doing, Clark? I felt so disappointed every time Mario looked at me like that. Like, man, you're dumb. You died again, bud. Timing is everything in those kind of games. And certainly in the arcade games I grew up with, they just wanted you to feed quarters into them, so it was all about timing. You had to memorize patterns. If you ever played Galaga, you know it's just about patterns. You got to memorize the patterns, and your timing has to be impeccable. You seeing it and you reacting has to be impeccable. Mine was not. I love games now. They're like video games are like a card game or unlimited lives. I can play those kind of games. This kind of game, my timing was off. I was either too early or too late. And it was frustrating. And you know what that's like, how frustrating that is if you've ever been too early or too late, if your timing's off. Some of you try to tell jokes and they fall flat because your timing is terrible. Well, comedy is a lot about timing, right? And so you know what that feeling is like. But God knew the timing. God knew the perfect timing. Humans were frustrated beyond belief with God. But he knew the timing. And he was waiting because he knew the reason. And this is the first reason. This is week 1. The reason was that Christmas is going to be a blessing to a world desperately in need. Christmas is going to be such a huge blessing, the birth of Jesus, that it needed to happen at the right time when people were ready for it, but not just saying they're ready for it, when the world really understood its need. Wars, slavery, terrible treatment of women and children. The world was rotten. And you may say, well, the world's rotten today. And you'd be right. But we have a hope that they didn't have back then. And that's where we're at. And now we have a duty to do something with this blessing. And I I can venture off into blessing talk pretty strong because I do believe in blessing very strongly. I just have a different belief than most of what's taught on your TV preachers, that I don't believe that blessing is intended to be hoarded. I believe we are blessed to bless. I believe we are reflectors. We are like mirrors. God blesses us in order to bless others. This is what Dallas Willard has written on the subject. He said, blessing is the projection of good into the life of another. I like his working definition. He says it isn't just words, though. It's the actual putting forth of your will for the good of another person. And it always involves God, because when you will the good of another person, you realize that only God is capable of bringing that. If you want to join in what God is doing in the world, then bless others. Bless them without any expectation of repayment. Bring good into others' lives. Oops. There we go. I want to share one quick story from Luke. And this is more typical of the Christmas scriptures we'll get into in the next few weeks. But this is the birth of Jesus being foretold. God sent an angel, Gabriel, to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a virgin named Mary. She was engaged to a man named Joseph. Gabriel appeared to her and said, "Greetings, favored woman. The Lord is with you." And then he said this to her. He said, "You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High." The stage was set for over 2,000 years in the making. And when this declaration went out, it changed everything. To me, a long, slow, gradual process actually adds to the credibility of the Christmas story. If humans were designing it, they would have a prophet say something one day and the next day instantly it happens, because we've pretty much always been a microwave kind of culture. We've always been people that just want it right now. But that's not what God did. It was in his timing, and God kept his promise. And Jesus is the fulfillment of the promise made to Abram that went through generations and generations and generations and ended in Jesus, who became a blessing, not just for the Israelites, but for all people. But it did begin with them. Israel became the light to the world that Abram was promised. They became the starting point, the origination point, ground zero for what happened good in this world. And the God of Israel would be worshiped across every corner of the earth. And surprisingly, in the end, everyone would be blessed by Abraham and his lineage, because it leads straight to Jesus. And so our world is better because God blessed Abraham, and because all of this happened in this time, and it sets up for the Christmas event. And Jesus' arrival is the fulfillment of that promise made in Genesis, being now delivered to every single person, and that's huge. Every man, woman, and child knows that God is for them because of the initial promise made to Abram. And so, as followers of Jesus, then if we want to follow Christ, if you want to come on that path with us, what we are all about is blessing this world. Because we've received such a huge blessing, we are about giving that blessing away. And so we're here to make our world a better place. We're here to help people that are hurting. We're here to look at how to be a blessing to our neighborhoods and our families, our classrooms and our workplaces, our cities and our nation. We're here to be a light to a world that is mired in darkness and pain and suffering. But we are here, we live here, so that people will be better off because of us. We do not simply choose to believe in Jesus or to think about Jesus or to marinate in the thoughts of Jesus, but we live to take action to live like Jesus. And that's the difference. When entire communities of people choose to live like Jesus, they make their community a better place to live. And at the end of the day, living like Jesus means blessing others. So this is the challenge for today as we close. This is my challenge to you this week. Think about how to actively bless someone. Maybe you pray about it this afternoon and say, maybe there's someone right now that's just come to mind. But just choose one person or one family and think about how could I bless them this Christmas. Not just enjoy the Christmas story, not just enjoy the foods and the songs and all of that for yourself, not hoard the blessing for yourself, but think about how could you take all those wonderful things and those feelings and how could you give something good to someone else? To, as Willard said, put forth your will on purpose for the good of another person. Like on purpose, choose to put your will towards the good of someone else. Become an active part of living out the Christmas story in 2023. Live it out. Maybe it's making a meal. Maybe it's being generous so that others can know Jesus. Maybe it's listening and praying with a friend. Maybe it's helping someone do a task they're not looking forward to. Whatever it looks like, bless someone. Because Christmas is a blessing to us. And the fact that Christmas is a blessing for all of us is one of the key reasons for this season. Next Sunday, we will look at part 2.